My Weirdest School, Book Number 4. Mrs. Meyer is on Fire. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Pelot. Chapter 10. A Real Spy Mission. As soon as the 3 o'clock bell rang, we all ran out of school and gathered in the playground. This was going to be a real spy mission. Okay, let's synchronize our watches, I said, because that's what they always do in spy movies. I don't have a watch, said Ryan. Me neither, said Neil. Actually, I didn't have a watch either. It just sounds cool to say, let's synchronize our watches. I have a watch, said Andrea. It's 5 minutes after 3. Of course Andrea had a watch. She's probably the only third grader in the world who wears a watch. Okay, I said, the big meeting at the firehouse starts in 10 minutes. Let's go. The firehouse is just 3 blocks from school. We slinked down the street like secret agents, ducking into doorways and hiding behind mailboxes along the way, so nobody would see us. It was cool. Finally, we reached the firehouse. There was a giant garage door where the fire trucks drive in and out. I'm scared, said Emily as we lurked next to the door. If Mrs. Meyer isn't in there, whispered Andrea, that's proof that she isn't a real firefighter. And if there's no meeting going on in there, whispered Michael. That means Mrs. Meyer is a liar. Shh, whispered Andrea, looking at her watch. It's 3:15 right now. We peeked our heads around the wall so we could snoop on what was happening inside the firehouse. Do you see anything? Neil whispered. No, whispered Michael. There's nobody in there. The place is empty. Nothing's going on, whispered Ryan. There's no meeting. That's proof, I whispered. See, I told you Mrs. Meyer wasn't a real firefighter. She's probably home watching TV and eating bonbons. Shh, whispered Andrea. That's when the most amazing thing in the history of the world happened. Mrs. Meyer came walking down the street. Well, that's not the amazing part, because Mrs. Meyer probably walks down the street all the time. The amazing part was what happened next. Mrs. Meyer was coming from the other direction. She didn't see us. Look, whispered Emily. She's going into the firehouse. At that moment, lights started flashing, sirens started screaming, bells started ringing, whistles started blowing, alarms started sounding, my ears started hurting. It must be a fire, shouted Ryan. We gotta get out of here. But it wasn't a fire. If it was a fire, all the firefighters would have jumped on the fire truck and driven out of the firehouse. Instead, they all jumped out from behind the fire truck and yelled at Mrs. Meyer. Surprise! A giant banner came down from the ceiling. Happy birthday, Mrs. Meyer. It's not a fire, said Michael. It's Mrs. Meyer's birthday. They're throwing her a surprise party, said Andrea. That's so sweet. Andrea was right for once in her life. All the firefighters gathered around Mrs. Meyer. They were hugging her and giving her presents. So I guess she really is a firefighter after all, said Alexia. Well, we had accomplished our spy mission. We were about to turn around and go home, but that's when the most amazing thing in the history of the world happened. What are you kids doing here? Mrs. Meyer suddenly asked. She had spotted us. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I had to think fast. We, came to wish you a happy birthday, I said. Great, said Mrs. Meyer. You're just in time for the party. Mrs. Meyer took us inside the firehouse and introduced us to all the other firefighters. They let us climb on a fire truck, which was really cool. And we got to pet their fire dog. But the coolest part was when they took us up to the second floor and let us slide down the fire poles. That was so much more fun than taking the stairs. I'm going to get my parents to put a fire pole in our house. Emily was too scared, but the rest of us slid down the fire poles 1,100 times. Then one of the firefighters wheeled in a giant cake. Cake! I love cake. This will make up for the cake I didn't get to eat on my birthday, said Emily. Mrs. Meyer must be really old because that cake had a lot of candles on it. 2 of the firefighters lit them, and then we all sang Happy Birthday. Make a wish, one of the firefighters told Mrs. Meyer. She closed her eyes. That's when the weirdest thing in the history of the world happened. But I'm not going to tell you what it was. Okay, I'll tell you. But you have to read the next chapter. So na boo boo on you. Chapter 11. Mrs. Meyer Gets Fired. Mrs. Meyer had her eyes closed, so she didn't see what happened next. But I did. The banner that said Happy Birthday, Mrs. Meyer had been tied to the fire pole on the second floor. I guess it wasn't tied very tightly because it slowly started to slide down. It was coming down right over the cake. The banner touched the candles on the cake. The candles lit the banner on fire. Eek! Went all the girls. It's on fire! Ryan shouted. Call the fire department! I shouted. This is the fire department, shouted Andrea. Then call the police department, I shouted. The banner was burning up. Everybody started yelling and screaming and shrieking and hooting and hollering and generally freaking out. Help! Shouted Neil. Run for your lives! Get the hose! Shouted one of the firefighters. The hose is on fire! Shouted another firefighter. The firehouse is on fire! I shouted. The banner was going up in flames, and some of the letters had burned up. Instead of reading Happy Birthday, Mrs. Meyer, all that was left was hair dye. Get a fire extinguisher, somebody yelled. Mrs. Meyer is on fire. It was true. Part of the banner had landed on Mrs. Meyer's pants, and now they were on fire. Stop, drop, and roll, shouted Andrea. Fall and crawl, shouted Alexia. Get low and go, shouted Ryan. Don't hide, go outside, shouted Neil. Toasty brown all around, I shouted. The firefighters squirted that foamy stuff all over Mrs. Meyer until they put her out. The problem was that now the cake was on fire. The cake is on fire, somebody shouted. Shoot the cake. It was true. Flames were coming out of the frosting. What's up with that? Whoever heard of a cake that caught on fire? That cake must have been made with gasoline or something. There were sirens screaming and lights flashing. Smoke was everywhere. The firefighters were shooting fire extinguishers and hoses all over the place. Everybody was slipping on goopy cake and falling all over the floor. What a mess! It was hilarious, and we got to see it live and in person. Finally, after 1,100 minutes, the firefighters put the fires out. We all wished Mrs. Meyer a happy birthday and left the firehouse. In the end, we didn't get to eat any cake. Again. Man, I hate birthdays, especially birthdays when you don't get any cake. Bummer in the summer. Well, that's pretty much what happened. Maybe next year, crybaby Emily will get to eat some birthday cake. Maybe they'll put trampolines in our class instead of desks. Maybe Mr. Cooper will use his supervision to shoot microwave freezing rays out of his eyes. Maybe we'll eat Mr. Klutz's melon head. Maybe I'll get to pee on another campfire. Maybe Mrs. Meyer will stop telling bad jokes, destroying smoke detectors, and jumping out of windows. Maybe they'll start a TV channel where they just bust stuff up all day long. Maybe firefighters will stop naming their children after hoses. Maybe my mom will start cutting the crusts off my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Maybe bears will stop running into our school. Maybe I'll melt the face off another one of my action figures. Maybe they'll make smoke detectors in the shape of a nose. Maybe I can talk my parents into putting a fire pole in our house. But it won't be easy.